Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Hey, I'm Greer, host of the Unfinished Idea podcast, mom to 2 boys and 2 dogs, and raising a child with additional needs. Our day-to-day experience isn't being talked about in everyday life. So let's start the conversation. Whether you're a parent, a friend, a teacher, or a neighbor, everyone is welcome to join us over a cup of coffee as we help bring awareness and better understanding about neurodiversity and families who are raising children with additional needs. We're here to share the joys, the struggles, and the differences, as well as learn and grow and feel seen and heard by how we interact with each other and the world. Welcome. Today's conversation is with Jean. I'm so excited to share our conversation with you as we talk all things ADHD, as both her and her son are diagnosed. We talk about hyper-focusing to unfinished projects to what it's like to be a woman with ADHD. So let's jump into our conversation with Jean. Today we have Jean with us. She has 2 boys and is living in the northwest of the UK. We talked about how language at home is that ADHD is a superpower. Can you tell us more about that? What does that mean to your family?
I love so many different things. I am a seamstress in my side time. I am going back to university to be a veterinarian. I'm also a full-time mom. And I love things like houseplants, fermenting. And I've used that with my children to make them interested in things. So my eldest is really into plants. My youngest wants to do constant, like, I want to make this, I want to do this. And we use it to get things out. If we're talking about something, we research it, we go into it. And I feel it's a superpower. If I didn't have ADHD, I wouldn't be looking into like, oh my gosh, you want to research Joseph's machine. So let's go into Rube Goldberg machines. So let's see how many things we can build, how many things we can do. So you want to do science, and we buy all the materials and we just spend the day doing a science project. And it's one of those things I don't think if you were neurotypical that you would be that interested in.
So just to make sure I'm correct, you have ADHD and one of your sons has ADHD. Is that right?
My husband thinks he might, but he's a self-employed gardener. My eldest is probably the most neurotypical, but both Tom and I was diagnosed when I was 8, and Tom's going through the process right now, and he's 8. So we both have basically spent our lives dealing with how can we handle our fidgeting? Like, what can we do to help ourselves when we're feeling a bit fidgety?
What do you do to help yourself when you need to fidget?
I've got a huge bag of crochet by the side of the sofa. So I've been making dissected rat and frog crochet projects. We also learned how to do bracelets recently. So Tom and I have been doing friendship bracelets. He wants to have a stand on our front garden where he puts out bracelets, and he wants to make a stuffed animal that's called Bob. We start a project and then the 2 of us get really into it. We hyper focus for 2 days and then we get distracted and then start a new project. And it's nice having that with a small child.
How often do you finish projects?
Never. We never finish a project. It's the bags of doom, isn't it?
What does bags of doom mean to you?
I don't know if you've ever experienced trying to tidy with somebody with ADHD. You make a pile of something and then you can put the pile in a bag and you can put the bag under like a surface and nobody has to see your piles. And in both the studio and at home, Tom and I have our piles of doom.
My husband, I call him the king of piles. He doesn't quite put them in a bag, but he has piles all around our house of stuff that I can't touch because he knows what's in the pile, but at the same time, he doesn't know what's in the pile. And it's like, yeah, we just have piles everywhere.
My problem is Tom is a messer, the small child with ADHD who's a messer, and he has to go around and he has to touch everything. So he'll go through my piles of doom. and he'll resort my piles of doom. So I don't know what's actually in the pile. I have a hard time because in my brain, I know exactly what I've stacked. However, Tom will move things out of my pile of doom into his pile of doom. And it's just like, mate, I've asked you one time to stop messing. And he's like, maybe I should be a mechanic because I'm really good at messing, but bad at putting it back in its spot. And he's like, I don't understand how you do that. He's a toe stepper. So I don't know if you've seen kids with ADHD, ASD, where they walk on their toes, but he also has to touch everything. He has to move everything. He has to physically manipulate his world around him. In my brain, I know exactly where everything should be. He moves it and I'm like, I'm losing my mind.
How have you coped with that? I don't know if coping is the right word, but how have you not lost your mind?
Things have their special spot in our house. So if you pick something up, you need to put it back. But there's so many times where he will come up and he'll just have a bunch of screws in his hand and be like, here you go, Mom. And I'll be like, why do you have a load of screws? He's like, I found them when I took them out of something. Okay, let's retrace your steps. Hold my hand. Fortunately, I've done another degree in special education and art. So it's very much, let's retrace your steps. I appreciate that you've got these for me. However, let's figure out why you've got these screws. And he's like, oh, okay. It's a whole adventure for him.
Does he eventually figure out why he got the screws when you retrace your steps, or is it a lost cause?
Like, he was at his grandma's one time and he brought her the pedal off her exercise bike. And he's like, I'm not sure how we got this off, but here you go. And she's like, what do you mean you got the pedal off the exercise bike? It's like, did you have a tool? He was like, I'm not sure. I can't remember that. And so it is just like, so what were you touching when you got the tool? Oh yeah, I was feeling the cloth on the table. Then I saw the wrench and then I thought, what could this wrench go through? You have to talk him through his process and be like, okay, so you had a wrench. So what did you go to next? I was holding the wrench and I looked out the window and then I thought, there's an exercise bike. And you're like, okay, so you do have to do the trace back the steps. These screws are from the exercise bike. Great idea. And then you're off on a new adventure.
That's like my son sometimes, which is interesting. I never thought about making it into an adventure because sometimes it's annoyance. I'm not going to lie. How does that work with his schooling? I don't know if you homeschool or do state public school, but how does him having to retrace his steps sometimes work for school and how he learns?
We're really fortunate. He goes to a small school locally, and his teacher has two boys that also have ADHD, and she's been his teacher for 2 years. So she knows Tom. And when we've been doing the process, the ADHD referrals, she's been so good about like all of the process, she's filled out all the forms of what he can and can't do. When he gets overwhelmed in his class, he actually gets sent up to the next year, who's going to be his teacher next year. So he's got like a lot of support in the school, but also the teacher that he's got this year knows him for next year, who is also my eldest son's teacher in year 4. So it's kind of community. We see his teachers outside school. My husband is the gardener for their school and the doctor's surgery around the corner. They know Tom. My eldest started there on his 3rd birthday when his brother was 6 months old. So they've all seen them grown up, and Tom's a bit of a liability and this is what he needs to succeed. And it's been really nice. So a lot of ADHD kids go big. A lot of autistic kids go big where they have like tantrums, they're screaming, they throw chairs, they're huge. Tom goes small. Usually it's girls that go small. So Tom is hyper bright. Where he hides, he gets a book. And his teachers are really aware that when Tom goes into himself, that's when they need to be aware of him. And that's when they need to be like looking out that Tom is having a meltdown. When they know that like when he disappears, when he hides in a corner, when he pulls out a book and hides under a coat, that's him being overwhelmed. That's him like having too much stimulus.
That's really interesting. I've only heard that in girls, or not heard, but people have experienced. Like Tom's the first I've heard that of a boy. So how does that work at home?
He's got a bunk bed. He sleeps on the bottom. He's got a curtain that he can pull across this bunk bed. He also has a reading den at the top. And we are very much aware, if you need to go quiet and small, you go upstairs and you can read. You can have your quiet space, which is a spinning around chair. So he's got a big circular cushion he can spin around and pull over himself so he can read comics. He can be quiet. And basically, we just make a lot of special spaces where if he feels overwhelmed, he knows that he can go in on himself and nobody's going to disturb him. And that's what makes him feel calm and comforted. He's not a tantrum thrower. Respecting that for him has always been important. He's almost 9 and still holds my hand. We need that. A lot of boys, they can't have that. And I think it's really important that they can feel that they have the ability just to have their blanket, books, quiet space and be left alone.
How do you, as a mom who has the superpower of ADHD, have your space? I don't know if you go big or small, but how do you have that? So when you get overwhelmed?
I used to go big. My mom had to work at my school. I was a tantrum thrower, a fight starter. I was like a boy with ADHD. And I'm really happy that I've been able to channel that back down, but I've always had to have a studio space. I've always had to have a space where I can say, I've got my space to go away. I've got my space to create. I've got a space where nobody can touch my stuff. We have a very important rule in our house. If you put something in your room, that's your space.
Yeah.
You know, Sam's got his own room, his space. If he wants to shut his door, we need to knock before we go in. And it's very much so you have your own space. If you need to just take yourself away to somewhere, that's absolutely fine.
How do you parent two different brains?
We talk a lot about how everybody's different and we all can't like the same thing. And if we all like the same thing, life would be really boring and we wouldn't ever have there would be a problem with getting catch up. But at the same time, we all have different brains. We need to be kind and respectful. It's about existing in the universe. That nobody's going to be like us. But at the same time, we can't be dismissive of other people's needs. And Sam gets frustrated with his brother. I was actually asking him, what would you say is the worst thing about your brother? And he was like, he's so frustrating because he doesn't get stuff sometimes. My sister is neurotypical and my brain is different than my sister's. It's just, we all have to respect. Everybody is a bit different. And if we all were the same, life would be dead boring.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
That's true. Life would be very boring. How have you received support for both yourself and Tom over the years?
I was really fortunate. My mom gave up working. She got her master's in agronomy when I was about 6 or 7 and then went to work in my school because I really struggled. I had cancer when I was little and I had anger issues along with ADHD. If anybody got too close, I would get aggressive. My mom went to school with me and helped me learn coping skills. When I got older, I found out not a lot of people have 200 houseplants. I've got 10 liters of kombucha I ferment. I started my first loaf of sourdough today. I had a load of reptiles. I get in these hyper focuses. I've always had a sewing studio. I've always been able, anything they want. And I think that it's not a detriment. You can have everything you want in life. However, you need to figure out your mechanisms for coping, whether it's having a safe space that you can go when you need to splurge your brain, or when it's fizzy, I can't have the telly on and music on. So making the boys decide, what do we want right now? Music or do we want the TV? Because if we have both on, I will literally go insane. So it's just finding that balance of what works for you. And if you're in a bad headspace, telling the kids, like, guys, we're going to dance it out. We're going to listen to Britney Spears for the next 2 hours. I'll learn all the words to Toxic.
How have you found that balance?
Finding those things when you feel insane, what makes you happy, finding your joy is the big thing. For people with ADHD, it's that dopamine release, isn't it? And that's your joy. So if the day is teaching everybody all the moves to buy, so everybody in your house, it's just buying. Or if, like Sam right now was eating Maycherry and watching X-Files, that's his joy. Finding that balance of what makes you joyful.
What would you say your thing right now is that brings you joy?
We're supposed to have a 90s pop party, but I started my sourdough loaf today, dealing with my sourdough starter, but also I am hoping to unfinish a couple of jumpsuits at the studio in the next few days. It's being fizzing in my brain.
What you mean by the fizziness in your brain?
When you have ADHD, you've got busyness. It's like, I need to make a shirt, learn sourdough, do this. So it's prioritizing, okay, I'm going to make sourdough. It's going to take 4 days. I'm still going to love it at the end. Last night, my 8-year-old Tommy was telling me how to make a hot air balloon and what fabrics we needed. He's like, we have to get these fabrics. And then today he's like, we're going to get those fabrics. Like, okay, cool. So we're going to make a hot air balloon. And he goes, I want to make a hot air balloon for a cat. Like, okay. So I don't think the cat's going to like a hot air balloon, but I do have ripstop fabric. And he's just like, I can't stop thinking about it. And you can feel him like touching his head and trying to get the thoughts back. So I want you to draw me a picture. I want you to tell me the ingredients you need. And it's this whole, like, you feel like there's so many thoughts in your head, you can't get them out. So it's like, okay, let's make a list and let's figure out how we can get the fizziness out. Like, all these thoughts are fizzing out of your head. Like, we're going to make a lemon meringue pie and talk about hot air balloons. And he's like, it's just that whole, you feel like you have so many ideas.
You mentioned a lot of people probably don't talk about when hyperfocus don't work out. What does that mean? What do you mean by when they don't work out?
When you're hyper-focusing and it's not working for you. So like, say you're really into houseplants, right? And you get distracted because you have to go to work and your houseplants get some sort of disease and they die. It's this huge anxiety, like basically you're telling yourself, but it's actually, they call it reactive, like, what was it? It's hyperreactive, saying, I failed because I'm a bad person. And it's really common in ADHD is saying that because I wasn't good enough, that something bad happened. And then you pick that up and it's like this whole anxiety where you weren't good enough in your brain. You made something happen and something bad happened. It's really negative. A lot of people with ADHD get anxiety. They get depression because they think that people are reacting negatively. Like, you have this idea, it's going to work out, and then it doesn't. And it's super effective on your mental health, especially women with ADHD. You think like, oh my God, I've got this whole idea. It didn't work out. Do you take it personally, negatively affecting your mental health?
Yeah. What would you say to younger people or older people who have ADHD who have experienced this kind of failed hyperfocus?
It happens to everybody. It's just the way that it feels like personal. It feels like somebody, like you could say, I plan this whole event. This is something I'm focused on. I want to teach everybody how to play this game. People don't enjoy the game as much as I do. So it's my fault. And I'm blaming myself when in reality, it's just people and it's nothing to do with yourself. It is, but as a person with ADHD, it's something so personal, as something you've invested yourself in, and people aren't reacting how you feel like they should. And it's so like, I'm a bad person. I failed at this. When in reality, it's just, maybe it's not how you think it should be.
It's that idea when you hyperfocus, you get really passionate about it. What you're saying is when someone rejects that thing, it's not just the thing, but also your passion. You've devoted all this time to it.
It's not just they don't like the idea. It's they don't like you and you're a bad person.
What is something you would want the world to know about people with ADHD?
We get told to stop messing, to hold still and be like everybody else. We can't stop messing. There's no way of switching it off, no volume down. My volume's always at 11. I am always at 11, and it's not our choice. We just are always at 11. Tom does everything at full speed. Now I've started shouting, I want you to be aware of your body. I have a first aid kit, but I don't want to use it. And like my kids have always said, can you stop knowing everybody when we're out and about?
Yeah, that's my son since he was 18 months. But yeah, since my son has been 18 months, 2 years, we and others like neighbors, friends, family have all said he's the Energizer bunny. He just goes and goes and goes and can keep going. But not just only does he go, but he goes at full speed constantly. We've talked about what you want the world to know about neurodiversity. What would you want parents raising a neurodiverse child, ADHD, autism, dyslexia, whatever it is, to know?
I want parents to know if their child is acting out, it's generally because they have a need that's not being met. They need to figure out what need is not being met and how to meet that need. If a child is acting out because they're going big, it's generally because they're not being listened to. Using vocabulary to say, I'm overwhelmed, or I'm feeling like there's too much going on, or I'm not understanding things is so much more important to kids than saying that people don't get.
What would you say or suggest one step that a parent is consistently being told their child is naughty? What could they do?
Describe the situation. What's happening? So like when they acted out, what happened before this? So looking back with the child as well and say, I understand you hit your friend. What led up to those steps? So were you bored? Were you hungry? Were you thirsty? And generally, for most kids, age 3 to 7, when they're thirsty, they actually act out more because dehydration is one of those big things. So when Sam was little, Sam had some anger issues. We made a flow chart. Am I hungry? Am I thirsty? First step, have a drink, have a snack. Then was I feeling overwhelmed? Was I being asked too many steps in a row? Was I being given instructions that were too many at a time? But saying, was I being demanded? Were things that teachers were asking of me too many steps? So was I being given instructions in more than one step? And most kids can only handle, if they're tired, if they're hungry, they can only handle one step instructions. And they're given like, go to the classroom, get your pen and sit down. It's 3 steps. That's a lot for small children. When you're tired, that's a lot when you're hungry. It's not fair. We don't look into that. How are your needs being met before you melted down? I threw a chair because XYZ happened. Why did XYZ happen?
You talked about a chart. Is that a resource you created, or can we find that somewhere?
Yes, a huge thing of IKEA paper. And we just sat down. Sam was having problems getting aggressive in class. So it was like, were you thirsty? Let's take care of this. Can you talk to Miss? Can you go outside? Can you take a break? It's the whole coping skills chart. So finding out like what I can do if my body's feeling angry. Can I move my body? Can I have a drink? Tell Miss I need to draw. Do I need to read? Have 10 minutes alone? I think a lot of kids don't have that vocabulary saying, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I need to go outside. Or I'm feeling overwhelmed right now. Can I go to the library? It's really important to develop that vocabulary.
Any other like tools or resources you've used that you would recommend, or you've just used and were like, this is good?
I think it's about building vocabulary. Tom can say, I'm feeling overwhelmed. We can step out of a party. He can cry outside so he doesn't feel like people are judging him. And it's also about reading cue of kids. Like, I can see you're feeling really frustrated. How can I help you? And having them say, okay, I am really frustrated. I want to go outside. Okay, fantastic. I hear that you're frustrated. Let's go outside. First and then, like, first we're going to do this, then we're going to do this. So rather than saying 3-step instructions, 1 step at a time, or a statement, I see that you're hungry. Here's 3 options for food. rather than, I see that you're hungry. What do you want to eat? It's too much. Keeping options and statements are really important for kids, even typical kids. Everybody is a grown-up. Even if I was melting down and my husband said, okay, Jean, I see that you're hungry. Okay, yeah, I feel better now. It's hard, even as grown-ups, to understand what we need. But I think for kids, it's getting that vocabulary and developing, like, you seem really frustrated. What can we do? What can I help you with?
You talked about creating that vocabulary, creating space for that kind of language. Is that something that just takes time?
I think it's the whole dialogue with kids, rather than saying, why are you being so difficult? It's like, you seem frustrated. Can you tell me what's going on? Or saying, you seem like X, Y, Z. Do you want to talk or just want some space? Tom can come to me when he's really upset and he can be like, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. And it's like, do you want to step outside or stay here and have me hold your hand? And he's like, I want to stay in, but can I hold your hand and sit in your lap? Okay, that's absolutely fine. And thank you for telling me you're frustrated or you're overwhelmed and it might be a bit loud in here. So if you just want to snuggle, that's fine. But just creating that emotional vocabulary, like I feel frustrated, I feel tired, I feel upset, is so important for figuring out the next step. And rather than him lashing out and say, I was frustrated, so I hit a kid. It's like, okay, you were frustrated, so he had his time out. And it gives you that emotional vocabulary. It gives you that time to have a little bit distance between emotion and action before they lash out or feel like they're being naughty or they're not being listened to. It's like, okay, you seem really overwhelmed. What can we do in this situation? So you're building a coping skill. When I feel like this is what I can do, I'm going to throw something outside versus at my friend's face. It's being able to distance the emotion from the reaction.
Yeah, that's really good. So the last question, because this podcast is a conversation over coffee, what would be your drink or drinks of choice?
Flat white, no sugar, because when we have to go get coffee, he is actually allowed to pay with my phone because I trust him. He's been doing craft fairs with me since he was 3. He's on my Face ID and knows how to use my card and all of my passwords because he is such a capable, almost 11-year-old that if I say, Sam, go coffee, he will bring me back the perfect one every time.
Nice. Thank you for joining me and for sharing all of your thoughts about ADHD, what it's like to grow up with ADHD and to raise a son with ADHD. An idea to finish on: hyperfocus, being intensely focused on an activity, thought, or interest. Hyperfocus can be difficult to predict and is usually not controllable. It can occur for hours at a time, to the exclusion of other activities. It can be any activity, work task, or play. Point to ponder on: how has hyperfocus benefited you? What is it like when you are in hyperfocus? What do you forget? Hey, did you know we do a bi-weekly, meaning every other week, newsletter? You can sign up in the link in the show notes and join the Unfinished community. I also want to give a special thank you to Amy Peters, who is the creator of the Neuro cards that we use here on the podcast. If you'd like to get your own set, follow the link down in the show notes.